This episode is brought to you by Let's Productions. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn. See you there.
You want to learn about CE5 and extraterrestrial contact? Download my new book, now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, and 14 other platforms. Book authored by Ledesma. CE5, Frequencies of Contact.
Alien Strand Podcast.
Well, I got out of the car and was about to walk towards this flying saucer that we saw up close. And Gloria, my wife, panicked and told me to get back into the car, which I did. And we drove off, but apparently we found out later that the flying saucer then came around into the road and stopped the car.
Where one being was in front of me and one being was in back of me, and at this point they had their different uniform. It was a sort of a shiny aluminum type uniform, and they put two black hoods on their heads. And we went out of this room into a very dark black tunnel that seemed as if it was chipped out of stone. There were other entrances, I could tell, because their uniform sent off like a bright light, and I could see like darker holes off to the sides.
Where I fasted for 4 days, no drinking, no eating. So I sat beside this big pine tree, and when I passed out, I was saying to myself, how big is the universe? And that tree must have shot me like an arrow. I could see the village, I could see the lake, I could see more. And I kept taking off more and more. I could see the earth, how big it was. And it just kept going, and I could see the earth was like this, it was going like that, and it disappeared. And then I looked the other way, and I could see stars. And the further I was going, the more things I was starting to see, galaxies and stuff like that. It was kind of news, and I got scared.
Paranormal documentaries this side of the Milky Way. Visit DarksideMedia.com for links to all our films on major streaming platforms. Until next time, keep on keeping on.
Hi, everybody.
This is Tyler Transfer from Darkside Media.
Welcome to this. Wow, what happened? Welcome to this episode of Alien Strand Podcast. I'm your host, Ledesma, and welcome to today's show. Man, you know what? We're not going live on video today. No, we're not. We're going to be on audio. Today is the audio podcast day. We just got to get some more, information out to you guys as soon as possible. But hey, welcome to Alien Strand Podcast. You can catch us on 26, 28 platforms. We're on Spotify. Right now, you're listening live on Spreaker. Thank you for listening live on Spreaker. I really appreciate you guys. And if you're driving, be careful on the road, always look both ways, okay? At your stop signs. These people have been running red lights. I don't get it. Everybody's always in a rush. Why are you in a rush? Take your time. There's a saying out there. Not a saying, but it's true. I don't know if you've done this before, but usually when the guy that's speeding, right, and he passes you up, right? You end up catching it to him in the next light anyway, so what the heck was his rush? Anyway, be careful out there if you're driving. Listen to Alien Strand Podcast. I really appreciate you guys. Like I said, you can catch us on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa. You can even ask Alexa. She'll play some Alien Strand Podcast. You know, you can listen to us all over the place, even on YouTube. We are live on YouTube actually right now. The audio, right? They're listening to us. Hey, shh, be quiet. Don't say nothing. No, believe me, we have a lot to talk about today because there's just a lot of information, right? And if you're new to ufology, hey, welcome to ufology and welcome to Alien Strand Podcast, you know, because that's what it's about. It's about learning ufology and learning the process of what we do in ufology every day, right? Because that's what we do. We kind of like, we research everything. We look at all the videos that are out there up in this, you know, about people shooting things up in the sky, and we analyze them. You know, we break them down for you the best we can. The best place to do it, Alien Strand Disclosure Project. That's ASDP. They're on Facebook. Follow us on Facebook. Now, if you're listening right now, you will have a link after this podcast is over. It's going to say all my links. You can actually click that right there. And it'll take you to Alien Strand Disclosure Project. It'll take you to all of our Alien Strand websites. It'll take you to our movies. It'll take you to our books. It'll take you to everything. Now, if you heard the opening commercial for Alien Strand Podcast, well, I have a new book. I just released it this week. Amazing, man. It's amazing how you can do things so quickly now. I mean, it's hard to write a book, yes, but the whole process is getting easier and easier to do this, right? So anyway, I was able to get my book out. It's called CE5 Frequencies of Contact, right? So you get to, you know, really, this book is going to show you the ins and outs of CE5. And if you're new to CE5 or want to know exactly what it is, you know, it's able to contact extraterrestrials or a different life form or interstellar life form using meditational processes, right? And by doing that, you're able to, contact in a meditation sort of kind of way, right? You get to contact these extraterrestrials, UFOs. You still use lasers, right? You still got to use the lasers. Use meditational frequencies as well. And I teach you all this in the book, and I show you what each frequency does to the brain and how it reacts to our body and our human chemistry and everything. It breaks it down, everything in there. Even the CE1 through CE5 categories. I explain it all in that book. So please go to Barnes & Nobles or go to Amazon books there, or you can go to if you still have a Kindle, download the Kindle app or go to your Kindle, go to the store there and look for CE5 Frequencies of Contact. And of course, it just came out. It's only like 68 pages, maybe 70 pages on some. So it's not very long, but it's a great book on the ins and outs of CE5, right? Of course, that all started with Mr. Dr. Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer. He's the one that actually made the CE5 what it is, right? He's the one that did the whole protocols to it and how to get that information out to people to do this yourself, right? So I decided to put it on black and white, on ink, so people who like, there's a book there. You can actually get a book, you know, in your hand, or you can download the ebook, right? Whichever way is easy for you. You know, if you have an iPhone, easy that way too. Easy peasy, man. That's how you download these books. They're easy reads. I love to read books. I love to have the paperback in my hand. I do read and I go buy books frequently because I like to hear other people's stories, man, because that's what we do here at Alien Strand, right? And because of that, I'm able to talk about this category that we're going to talk about today. You know, I went and picked up a few books. One was called A Cosmic Encounter, right? And this one was by Stuart W. Bench. He released this in 2021, right? So you're able to see this book. It's pretty much everywhere on any of these bookstores, half-price books. Go check it out. I highly recommend you getting that book. Not only, I mean, I don't know him, but I'm reading the book like I know him. But the information that he gives on his extraterrestrial encounters is phenomenal, man. It's phenomenal because he gets detailed on what he saw and exactly how he saw it, right? So, and it's called, again, A Cosmic Encounter, right? A true story of an alien abduction by Stuart W. Bench, right? Great book. Great read. Also picked up an older book. It's called Alien Encounters, True Life Stories of UFOs and Other Extraterrestrial Phenomenon, right? This was by Rupert Matthews, right? Really good book. You know, it gets down to the beginning and Roswell, and a lot of authors will do that. We'll go back to the beginning to kind of give you a brush up on history, because maybe somebody didn't put something in, you know, and they do actually do, they added some Pentagon files in this book, right? So you're able to dig a little deeper into the disclosure, right? Because that's exactly what it is, because they're disclosing the information of the extraterrestrials, right? And or UFOs that have crashed out there. Everybody wants to know that, right? I mean, I know I do. I want to know all there is to know about it, as much as possible, right? And it's kind of hard to make people understand the concept of if a UFO lands in front of you and you're standing in the presence of a craft or a ship of some sort, right? And to explain to people what you're seeing without having a physical camera in your hand, a lot of these stories, they didn't have, you know, we didn't have cell phones back then, you know, in the 90s, early 90s, you know, and if they did, they didn't have cameras. I mean, people weren't always carrying cameras in their pockets, right? I mean, we did have those little 110 one clickers, you know, back in the day. I remember because I was alive back there. Hello, I'm an old guy. But, you know, not everybody had a cell phone, right? So the technology wasn't quite there yet. So they were able to explain a lot of things that did happen while a lot of these extraterrestrial encounters were happening at the time, right? And that's what these books are for, you know, an actual physical book to sit there and read it, not just listen to podcasts. I love listening to other people's podcasts, but a lot of times you're missing out a lot when you don't have the physical book in your hand, because the extra information is in there that you didn't know, right? And what caught my attention on, you know, that the subject of these UFO crafts is because, you know, the new book that I was reading, right? And then I came across on a couple of other stories, and then I remembered the Bob Lazar story, right? And how he really talks about these crafts are like 25, 30 feet long, you know, about as large as a school bus, and how they had like 3 tiers inside of it. Like there was a lower compartment, right? There was a hatchway that opens up, right, where these extraterrestrials walk out. You know, there's a middle compartment where, you know, at least 2 or 3 fit in that compartment. And there's a upper compartment, which is a small one-seater. It's like the bubble or the glass that's on top, so they can see out, in a sense, right? So when we first heard Bob Lazar talk about that, I was like, wow, you know, that's pretty interesting. And then he put it all on paper, right? And he made drawings of it. And, you know, and then he started getting interviewed. Of course, there's a documentary out there about it, right, as well. And it's a really good one. You know, I ain't gonna put the guy down, but it's a really good documentary. So it's one of those things that you have to watch and then understand how these pieces of these puzzles come together, right? And that's what they do. They come together as these stories come about, right? And, you know, there's a lot of coincidences involved in a lot of these stories, to where that's when I told you earlier that you get to have that aha moment, right? Like, whoa, wait a minute, I heard that in this story, or it complements this story, right? And I've talked about it way before on an older podcast, and I've actually put things together on older podcasts to make you understand that a lot of these people come from different parts of the world, and they're telling their stories, and they're not quite similar, right? In other words, they sound similar, and they almost look similar to where you think, oh, they're just copying this person, or they're just saying the exact same thing this person said. No, in reality, no. The stories are different to where you, as a reader or as a researcher, get to put that together yourself and say, wait a minute, that sounds like this category of extraterrestrials, or that sounds like that category of extraterrestrials that happen to be there at the same time, or it's the same extraterrestrial race, right? Or entity, whatever it is, whatever you want to call these things, right? The grays, that's what we talk about. So there's a story on early October morning. This happened in Calgary, Canada, 1965. This gentleman his name was Bill Herdzeki. He says, I was riding out of my Circle Ranch. He was out in the ranch, right in the middle of nowhere. It says some miles north of, Canada. He says, he's sort of like a cowboy, right? And at the time, remember, 1965. So he was bringing the cattle down from on top of a hill. But it was coming down to the lower ground, right? And he said all of a sudden that while he was coming down this hill with the cattle, that the horse kind of got spooked in a sense, right? And it kind of jolted a different direction. He was wondering, okay, why did this horse do this, right? And he's kind of turning the horse to that direction. The horse doesn't want to go. So he starts going down this valley, right? So Bill Herdzeki, he saw when he looks down this valley, and it looks like a craft or some sort that was shot down or was that crash, he thought, right? This is what first came to his head. He said, I'm going to go walk down there. He got off the horse, decided to walk down there because the horse was already spooked at the time, right? So he says, I'm going to go down there and investigate a little bit and just to see what that is, right? He says that object turned out to be some kind of a silver or gray or metallic shape. He says it was about 16 feet by 12 feet across. He said the sides had flanges or some kind of small wings shaped like those of some kind of a bird of some sort or prey. He says on the top of the front of the craft was a dome made of glass or some kind of transparent material. He says, like I always talk about on these UFOs, he says that there was no rivets, no welding marks, nothing like that. It was seamless, right? That this craft was totally seamless. He says there was like no joints in between the dome of the glass or anywhere on this craft. It just seemed like it was one piece. But the material almost seemed like skin. He says it was like real thin, kind of strange looking. He says he looked inside and there was like 2 seats, small seats, he says. Probably big enough to hold a child, he was saying. It looked like a something that was going to be tiny that was going to be driving this thing. So on the other side of the craft, there was a door that came down like some sort of hatch of some sort, right? So it was already down on the ground. Remember, when he walks up to this craft, it's down on the ground. Door open. He's looking inside. He sees 2 empty seats. He says the door was slightly open so he can kind of look inside. He said it kind of looked like maybe a 3-foot person would probably fit inside of this craft, whatever it was. And he also said that he was afraid that something was going to pop out while he was sticking his head in there. He didn't understand what he was seeing. Remember, 1965. So, he also said that the craft was making some kind of a humming noise, like a low hum, right? I've talked about that on a couple of my podcasts, even the live ones. I've showed the 40 hertz frequencies, right, of that low hum sound that made my dogs go crazy, right? So Bill was he was pretty intrigued about what he was looking at, right? And he says he couldn't find anybody inside because he was just kind of peeking in halfway. But he was kind of afraid that somebody would return. He even said inside this crap there was like a 14-inch flat sort of screen that went across. There was nothing displayed on it, he says. He says along the top of this was 5 dials with markings on them. He said they didn't look like any kind of markings that I know or I understand or I've seen. He says behind the seats there was a small wall with a closed door in it. He says beside the door there was what might have been lights. He says Bill, he went to go check if there was some sort of exhaust on it, like maybe a jet or anything like that. And he says there was no physical markings or any kind of jet propulsion system coming out of this craft. Just to see if there was some kind of rocket outlets, right? What do our jet planes have, right? Almost looks like a rocket in a sense, but on a larger scale. Finally, he said, you know what? I'm scared. I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm just going to go ahead and back away. He goes, I figured if I didn't bother them, they're not going to bother me. So he said he walked away, got on his horse, got the cattle down in the valley, back to the ranch. So when he got back to the ranch, he started telling the story of what he had seen to the other cowboys that were there that was helping on the ranch. They were intrigued about it, and they said, well, it's late now. We can't see anything out there. Remember, this is Canada. They said, let's just go out in the morning and go see if this thing is still there. So they go out the next morning, get on their horses, get their rifles, and start heading that direction, right? So when they get there to the same spot where he was at, he noticed the craft was gone. But there was some burn indentions in the ground where this craft had been sitting on a sort of a tripod looking legs of some sort, and it burned the ground. So in a sense, you're kind of looking at a close encounters of the second kind and the third, in a sense, because he was able to touch this craft, which makes it the third, and stick his head inside. Close encounters of the second kind, you visually, or has to be literally in front of this craft, in front of you physically. Third is when you're making contact with this craft. Fortunately for him, he didn't see any occupants, or if there was any occupants, they were probably hiding in the brush. I'm sure they saw him. You know, I talked about the same story with Dr. Enrique Bota, right? This was in 1950s, right? You know, he talked about seeing this craft, going inside. It looked almost exactly like this craft, he explained. He says this object was shaped like a dome, right? Made of silvery material. But this one had no legs, no landing gear, and it seemed to be resting slightly above the ground. In other words, it was in a hover. And he was able to peer and look inside this craft because he saw this on the side of the road and walked up to it. He looked inside, saw an empty room, a glow, a flashing red light. And he said everything looked like it was made out of metal, but it looked like skin. And the craft had some sort of a jelly softness to it, right? While he walked inside. This guy got to walk inside, right? He was a doctor and a pilot. So he knew something about flying, what crafts were, what airplanes were, and knew that this was nothing that we had, right? So this is what he's explaining. Even when he walked inside, now this craft was more like a 30-foot craft. A little bit bigger than the Canadian story. But he said he saw, when he walked in, he was able to see 3 figures inside of this craft, and they approached him, right? And he says when he got close to it, he was kind of like in a control room, right? There was a panel with gauges, lights, things that look like meters. And there was a panel that floated like a transparent sphere, right? Which rotated slowly. This is in the center of the craft. You know, he was able to get close to one of these figures because they noticed him. he was able to reach out and touch one of these things. He says it was sort of like a humanoid, kind of rigid and hard. He said the skin felt like charred wood. He said that he's kind of thought that these beings were dead. And he immediately turned around and ran to his vehicle. He was able to get away. And this happened in 1950, but he didn't talk about it till 1955, mind you. He waited 5 years. So between both of these stories, this craft looks and sounds almost exactly alike, right? And that's why I call this one, alien crafts, because we want to understand what these crafts are, what they're made of, what the material is, how is it that they're working, and how is it that they're generating this energy, right? And were they all similar, right? And these are all similarities. This one had a 15 to 20 year time span in between both of these stories. One was a disc, one looked like a bird, right? Sort of small winged. But they had the same similarities in each story of how this craft looked and how it operated, right? Which brings me to the recent story that I was reading, right? The story of a cosmic encounter. This book that I had just purchased, and it came out in 2021, mind you. And this happened around 1997, his story. And I'm going to tell you the similarities of his story from what the two I just gave you. I don't want to spoil this book for you because you have to read this. Now, this last story of Mr. Stuart Bench in 1997, his was a strange story, though. He was able to not just have one, but two encounters. And the second encounter was the most vivid encounter and the most strange encounter. Because he did describe this craft to the T, from how big it was, what the inside looked like. Seamless, right? There was a table inside of there. There was 3 tiers inside of this thing. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about his story. His was around in 1996, 97. They were having issues with a lot of squirrels, right? And their property. So him and his wife, and they said, you know what? We need to relocate these squirrels. There was just way too many, and they were tearing up a lot of the house, and they wanted to be humane about it, right? So he would catch the squirrels in a little trap, and drive out. He lived out in the country, but he would drive out a few miles out to, more open area where there was the same kind of trees and everything that they liked. And he was relocating them in this general area, probably about 15, 20 miles from the house. So he did, his first trip, goes, comes back, does another trip, takes some more squirrels out there. Following day, he goes and gets some more squirrels. He goes, all right, let's go ahead and relocate these today. So he gets these squirrels, takes them out there, puts them on the ground, regular day, like a noon afternoon. Sun's bright. It's a warm day. He turns around, says, you know what? I got to head back. So he starts driving his pickup truck back home. Probably about 2 miles from the location that he left. He starts seeing this light behind him. Looked like a car, he said, with its headlights on. He goes, I didn't understand. It was daylight, it was kind of bright behind me. He goes, I couldn't understand why I was seeing this light. Just figured out it was a car. So this thing was coming closer and closer and closer to him, right behind him. And he notices that this craft, or whatever it was, it came behind him and went up above him. And as soon as it did this, his whole vehicle just turned off. So he coasted it on the side of the road and noticed that there was a shade around him because it was a bright sunny day, right? And he noticed there was only a shade around my truck, a circular shape. Says my truck wouldn't turn on. Everything died. Battery, everything. It was an older pickup. The gauges didn't work. Radio didn't work. Nothing turned on. Lo and behold, he looks up and he notices that there's a light above his and a shadow above his truck. He was trying to turn his vehicle on. He couldn't. It wouldn't turn on. Finally, this craft decided to take off at a high rate of speed, and he saw it. He says, I waited a few minutes. I didn't know whether to walk and try to go get a wrecker or whatever because my truck wouldn't turn on. So he cranks on the truck. Lo and behold, it turns on. It's like, oh, good. By the time he got home, it was already evening. It was tired. He says, you know what? I'm just going to keep this to myself. I don't think I should tell anybody about what just happened. I don't understand it myself. Anyway, lo and behold, a few years pass, at least 2, decides to take a vacation out to a lake. Says, I need to go fishing. I want to go and relax, have a week with some friends. There was a cabin out there that they rented me, that they let me have. Decided to go out there. Gets there, pops open a beer, sitting outside by the lake, enjoying it. And he notices there's a bright light in the distance. Doesn't pay too much attention to it. Mind you, he's out there by himself. This light comes closer and closer to him. And he starts getting this edgy feeling like, oh my God, is this the same thing that I saw 2 years ago? And lo and behold, this craft approaches him, probably about 30 feet above him. Casts a shadow over him again and goes closer to the embankment where it was at. This time, a landing pad or a walkway came down a ramp, and 3 extraterrestrials came out. At this point, he was scared for his life. Didn't know what was going to happen, right? So they came, and he says, I was trying to think in my head. I read stories about this kind of things that are happening to him, and I had a feeling they were going to try to speak to me telepathically. He goes, but they weren't saying anything to me. I couldn't hear anything. They just grabbed me by the arms slightly and walked me into the ship. Now, mind you, he's totally coherent. So they get him into the ship. They put him on the table. He's noticing everything. The seats. There was a lower part of this craft. Lower section that Bob Lazar talked about. There was a middle section that had 2 seats, with both of them with a joystick sort of control. There was a reactor of some sort in there as well. There was 4 tubes on one side of the craft and 4 liquid tubes on the other side. So it's like a dark color of liquid. But this is where it gets interesting, right? He said the door closed, and I got scared, and I thought to myself, oh no, I'm going to get, they're going to pull something from me. I'm going to get probed and all that stuff. This is what was going through his mind. But yet they didn't do anything to him yet. So he noticed that the oxygen levels inside this craft were very dense. He said it's like if you go on top of maybe a 8,000, 10,000 foot mountain and the air is very thin. That's what it was kind of hard to breathe inside of this craft. It's breathable. He says, but what I noticed was these extraterrestrials, grays, what they were. 2 of them walked into that chamber that looked like a tube, and they went in there to rejuvenate, in other words, to breathe. Thus comes my other point that I've always talked about. They have a hard time breathing in our atmosphere, right? So he said they used this tube for about maybe 5 minutes or so, and then they got back out. He says, I think they used it to kind of rebreathe again or rejuvenate their oxygen levels or something, whatever it was. He says on the very top of this craft, there was a glass dome. I'm 6 foot. He goes, and I can literally stand inside to the 2nd and 3rd floor of this craft. It was on the top. There was a seat above where there was a glass you could see out. Inside was seamless. Tables, everything was this metallic silver color. He says there was lights inside of this thing that you couldn't see, possibly coming out of the walls. But what intrigued me the most out of that story was that he said, I don't know if you know what a flywheel is, like a transmission or a car flywheel. Let's just say a large diesel engine. It's got a huge wheel. It's a flywheel. That's what they call it. He says this thing is in the center of the craft and it's spinning. You know, like you get a bicycle tire, you hold the axle and you spin it and you try to move it, and it has that stiff motion, right? He said, so that was the actual stability. In other words, that was keeping the craft stable. And the reactor that was infused with it was making the electronic magnetic field inside of this craft. Because they did take him up out of the Earth's atmosphere. He says they strapped me down of some sort of belt of some sort. He goes, they even strapped themselves down, which means in our atmosphere, there is inertia. Inertia is the movement like you get from a roller coaster ride or any kind of ride. You have that push, that G-force. There is inertia, but not a lot of it. Some does take place inside of this craft. He goes, they didn't release their seat belts or their belts that was holding them down or straps until we got into space, out of the Earth's atmosphere, where I could see the Earth and the moon. He said they would let me release my belts as they released theirs, and we were in total zero gravity, or we were floating around. They actually let me do cartwheels and float above and around the craft. And they only did this for a short amount of time. He said it felt like 2 hours almost by the time this whole thing took place, because they brought him back. As they descended back to Earth, brought him back, walked him out. He goes, I could walk. I was fine. But they grabbed me by the arms gently and walked me down the ramp. At that time, they were talking to him telepathically. And they told him. They showed him things while he was on the table. Like he could see his life kind of flash before his eyes in the past. It would always show himself talking or reading a book or fishing or driving. But on his peripheral vision, in the vision, he could see a gray standing there. So they didn't communicate with him in a verbal sense. They were able to communicate with him by showing him visions. So like when he was at the lake, he could see his peripheral vision in the vision of a gray standing there. Or if he was in his truck driving, in the vision that they were giving him. And his peripheral, he could see a gray there. In other words, what they were telling him, we are going to monitor you. So the first craft that happened 2 years prior, he doesn't remember anything. As far as like, he just felt like it from 1 second to the next. But they found him again. And this time, the second time, they were able to put an implant inside of his nose, he says. Because the next morning when he woke up, there was blood all over his pillow. And he feels that this was inside of his nose. Now, the fact that all these stories coincide together in the sense of this extraterrestrial craft and how they work, not just the extraterrestrials themselves, but just the storyline. And the book is very detailed on how these crafts operate. He almost seems like an engineer when he's telling you. So he knows exactly what he's talking about. He's showing you drawings, pictures, just like Bob Lazar did, right? In which I put these 3 stories together for you today because I want you to understand that even these were different timelines, 1950, 1997, 1960s, different timelines, right? But the stories coincide together like a puzzle. One of the crafts might have looked differently, but the information in a lot of these books makes you understand exactly what you're reading and how your visionary expectancy is. It's when you're kind of thinking about what this storyteller is telling you in your visionary and envisioning actually in your mental thoughts, right, of what was taking place and how this looked like, right? Just like when anybody tells you a story about anything, you're kind of envisioning actually the story, even if it's a comedian or anybody out there. Gets you pulled in, right? So in all these stories, the crafts inside look the same. They're seamless. They're silver. They're metallic-y. Tiny seats. These extraterrestrials are 3 foot tall, all similar, right? And that's what we have to put together. And the fact that the new information that just came out of this book was this flywheel-looking thing in the center of this craft that was spinning. He says this thing, as we rose up, this thing was spinning faster and faster. And it was giving the ship stability to go forward, back, side to side. It was giving the balance and electronic magnetic field inside of this craft, which was giving it lift, trajectory, propulsion. All this is in these books. And this is what I tell you, my friends. You have to put these pieces of the puzzle together, right? Because that's where you get all these images and information that you need for ufology. And this is key to learning the process of ufology, because we get to understand it a little bit better as these stories come out more detailed. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this information that I gave you today. I know I did. And it was my absolute pleasure giving you this information on these books, because the information is out there, guys. It's up to you to go look for it if you really seek it, right? Seek and you shall find, right? Hey, come on now. That's exactly what it is. And I appreciate you guys listening today, the Alien Strand Podcast. Remember, I'll have the links to everything that I talked about today on this podcast at the end. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, please hit us a like and subscribe, because we need that. We really need that out there. As a matter of fact, our YouTube, The Middle, is out again for free without commercials. Come on, go to our YouTube channel, Alien Strand. Go check it out. Go hit a like and subscribe. You can watch The Middle for free, the whole entire documentary without no commercials. What more do you want? I'm giving it all to you guys. Well, that has been my time. And I had a great time today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast. I've been wanting to get one of these audio podcasts, a little bit better one, out to you. I know you guys kind of been listening to me ramble on the video podcast, but doesn't get any better than this, right? Sometimes you gotta just go back to your roots, like I always talked about. I enjoy this, man. I enjoy this, doing this. Remember to catch us on iHeartRadio, Spotify. Hit us a like, share our podcast, go to our YouTube, share, go hit us up on X. We're there as well. I'm going to be doing a video podcast is there pretty soon here. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. I don't know. I'll probably do one. I just like to throw those out on the fly. But if you do catch one, give us a like and subscribe. Tell your friends about Alien Strand Podcast. You know what? Because we're here about the information. We all work together as a team, like Alien Strand Disclosure Project. There is no I in team, right? All right. So don't forget, catch us there. Oh, don't forget, if you need to, want to be on the show, call me, man. 361-245-8000. Again, 361-245-8000. Or send me an email. If you want to be on the show, I'll be glad to get you on. You want to talk about your encounter? You want to talk about Bigfoot? You want to talk about supernatural? Anything like that? Give me a holler. Send me an email. I'll be glad to get you on the show. I really appreciate you guys for hanging out with me today. It's been my pleasure. But until then, you guys have yourselves a good day. Have yourselves a good evening. And have yourselves a good night.
about CE5 and extraterrestrial contact, download my new book. Now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, and 14 other platforms. Book authored by Ledesma. CE5, Frequencies of Contact.